I think what every delegate to the Democratic National Convention wants, most importantly, is to defeat Donald Trump. The case we'll make is that I am the stronger candidate. In every state that we have won, in 19 states, we have had to take on the entire Democratic establishment. We've had to take on senators and governors and mayors and members of Congress.
Bernie Sanders today with my colleague Andrea Mitchell talking about taking on the Democratic establishment. And I'm joined now by Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She's also the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us. Well, let me ask you about what Bernie Sanders is saying there. I mean, it's no mystery. We put that super delegate count up all the time. The lion's share of elected officials on the Democratic side have been backing Hillary Clinton, not backing Bernie Sanders. He said the establishment has been out to get him. Has this process been fair to Bernie Sanders?
Of course it's been fair. We have managed this primary throughout the primary nominating contest in a neutral and fair way, and there are a number of primaries left. We will see those through the end. Each candidate is running their primary, their election as they see fit, and we look forward to uniting as a party once we have a presumptive nominee.
Well, let me ask you about that, because there's some dispute here over what that's going to mean. If we get to the end of the primary process, everybody's had their vote, every primary, every caucus has been held. If Hillary Clinton has the most pledged delegates from that process, should she be the nominee?
Well, we have a process that will go through all the way to June 14th, when the last primary nominating contest takes place in Washington, D.C. And then we move on to preparing, as we already are doing, for the Democratic National Convention. Our process allows for both pledged delegates and our unpledged delegates to cast a vote towards the total votes that eventually our nominee will earn.
Well, I mean, I'm asking because when we've talked to Bernie Sanders in his campaign, they offer you two different scenarios here for how they see themselves winning the nomination. One is, look, they say if we can win this pledged delegate count during the primaries, we'll say we have the will of the people behind us. We'll make those superdelegates change their votes. The problem is there's basically no way to see them winning the pledged delegate count during the primaries. And then when you confront them with that, they say, okay, we will then go to work on the superdelegates and make an electability argument and say, hey, superdelegates, Bernie Sanders does better against Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton. You should support him even though he didn't win the pledged delegate count. So I guess what I'm asking you is that a legitimate way for somebody to win the nomination, to get fewer delegates out of the primaries, but then rely on the superdelegates to put him over the top?
Steve, frankly, it's not appropriate for me to comment as the DNC chair on the strategy that either one of our candidates has towards earning the majority of the delegates they need to become the party's nominee. So, like I said, we're focused on making sure that we can prepare for the general election, make sure that we have a convention that will be the best in American history, that'll launch our nominee to the White House in the fall, and finish managing this primary so we can make sure that we wrap up the primary nominating contest and we can all move to, come together, which I frankly will tell you is going to be a lot easier than the process that's playing out on the other side of the aisle, where you have Speaker Ryan who has said they can't fake that they're unified, and scores of Republicans, their former presidents, their former Republican nominees for president, a number of members of Congress, the United States senators who aren't even going to the convention nor endorsing or supporting the presumptive nominee that they have already in Donald Trump, because he's that extreme, that misogynist, and they know what a drag he's going to be on their ticket.
Well, let me ask you about your own situation in your own congressional districts. You're being challenged. We mentioned this in the last segment. You're being challenged in your primary this August, Democratic primary. You have a challenger who's a supporter of Bernie Sanders, who's brought in close to $1 million now. Very unusual for a challenger, especially going up against somebody in leadership, to bring in that kind of money. Some of this money, it seems like maybe a lot of it, is coming from Bernie Sanders supporters in small dollars who do not necessarily think you've been a fair arbiter in this primary process. How do you read that kind of opposition you're facing here?
I'm focused on two things. One, continuing to serve my constituents and having the privilege that they've given me, the privilege of representing them in our nation's capital to the best of my ability, and making sure that when I run for re-election, as I am right now, I talk about what I've been able to do for them and earning their support once again, and 2, making sure that we do everything we can to elect a Democratic president. Those are my professional responsibilities, and that's what I'm focused on.
Your challenger, Tim Canova's his name. He says he sent you 3 letters asking you to debate. He hasn't heard back. He's had supporters, I guess, who've shown up at your events trying to get you to commit to that. Let me ask you here, will you debate your primary opponent before the August primary?
Steve, I'm focused on the 2 things that I just said. Making sure that I can represent my constituents to the best of my ability. I'm going to run for re-election and communicate with my constituents about the work that I've been able to do on their behalf, like I always do, and making sure that I can do the best job as the chair of the Democratic National Committee to help us elect a Democratic president.
Let me just ask you again.
Let
me just ask you again.
I'm here to speak to you as the DNC chair, so I'm happy to talk to you about the presidential campaign, which is why I'm here, and I've answered your questions.
Hold on now. You haven't answered this one question. You're a candidate for re-election. I think it's a legitimate question. Will you debate your opponent in your race for re-election?
Steve, again, I'm going to continue to focus on representing my constituents to the best of my ability, doing the good job that I've been able to do representing them for the last 24 years, and making sure that when I run for re-election, they know the work that I've been able to do in earning their support once again, and making sure that as DNC chair, I help do everything we can to elect a Democratic president. Those are my 2 responsibilities.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Congressman and chair of the Democratic National Committee. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
All right, our panel is next.